Death smiles at us all. All a man can do is smile back. Those words from Marcus Aurelius cut straight to the heart of Stoic philosophy, a school of thought that didn't just confront mortality, but wielded it as a tool for unbreakable resilience. Think about that for a moment. What if the very thing that keeps most people awake at night, the fear of endings, could become your greatest source of strength? The Stoics didn't just ponder this question, they built entire lives around it. For them, death wasn't a shadow to flee from, but a mirror forcing them to live with urgency, purpose, and unshakable clarity. This is the paradox we're exploring today, how history's most disciplined minds transformed the ultimate fear into fuel for legendary resilience. Picture this: 2,000 years ago, a Roman emperor, one of the most powerful men alive, would start each day by reminding himself that everyone he loved, everything he owned, even his own breath, was temporary. Not out of morbid obsession, but to sharpen his focus on what truly mattered. Seneca, another Stoic giant, put it bluntly: "It's not that we have too little time, but that we waste so much of it." These weren't just poetic musings, they were battle plans for the mind. The Stoics developed brutal yet beautiful mental practices we can still use today to turn the awareness of life's fragility into a superpower. So here's the challenge we're tackling. What if you could stare down your deepest anxieties, not just about mortality, but about failure, loss, or uncertainty, and emerge calmer, stronger, more focused than ever? That's the gift Stoicism offers. This video isn't just about ancient wisdom. It's about rewiring your mindset to thrive under pressure. We'll uncover the specific techniques Stoics use to transmute fear into fuel, from negative visualization to the discipline of desire. By the end, you'll have more than inspiration, you'll have a toolkit to build what Marcus Aurelius called the inner citadel, a mind so resilient that even life's hardest blows can't shake its foundation. The journey starts with a single, counterintuitive step, embracing the very thing most spend their lives running from. Ready to begin, the Stoics had a name for this radical embrace of life's impermanence: Memento Mori, Latin for "remember you must die." But don't mistake this for some grim obsession with the end. Think of it instead as a wake-up call, a way to strip away distractions and focus on what's essential. Seneca wrote letters urging his friends to live as if each day might be their last, not to spread fear, but to ignite purpose. He put it plainly: you act like mortals in all you fear, and like immortals in all you desire. That's the heart of the practice. By keeping death close not as a threat, but as a teacher, we stop postponing what matters. Consider how most of us move through life, chasing promotions, scrolling endlessly, holding grudges, or waiting for some perfect future moment to start living. Now contrast that with someone who carries Memento Mori in their bones. Every conversation becomes richer because it might be their last. Every challenge feels lighter because they've already made peace with life's fragility. The Stoics weren't just philosophers, they were doers. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire while journaling about his own mortality. Epictetus, born a slave, taught that remembering death was the key to true freedom. Here's the twist: avoiding thoughts of death doesn't make life longer, it makes it smaller. We fill our days with trivial worries, mistaking busyness for meaning. But when you confront the reality that time is limited, something shifts. Petty arguments lose their sting. Courage feels more natural. Even joy becomes sharper because you're no longer taking it for granted. Try this today. Pause and ask yourself, if this were my last year, what would I stop doing? What would I start? That's not morbid, it's liberation. The Stoics knew that death's shadow makes the light of life brighter if we have the courage to face it. What makes death such a powerful teacher for the Stoics wasn't just its inevitability, it was its refusal to play favorites. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor who commanded armies, would write in his private journal, "Alexander the Great and his mule driver both died. The same end awaits us all." That's the Stoic lens in action. Death doesn't care about your wealth, your titles, or your social media following. It's the ultimate equalizer, reducing kings and beggars to the same dust. And that realization, it's liberating. When you internalize that no amount of money or fame can buy you a single extra breath, the ego starts to dissolve. The petty competitions, the desperate need for approval, they begin to feel like shadows chasing shadows. Think about how much energy we waste today trying to impress strangers, climbing ladders that lean against the wrong walls. The Stoics cut through that noise with surgical precision. Epictetus, who lived with the scars of slavery, would ask his students, "Why are you dressing so finely?" To impress whom? The same people who will forget you before your body is cold. Harsh, maybe, but that's the point. Mortality strips away illusions, leaving only what's real. Marcus Aurelius would practice this daily, visualizing his own funeral to remind himself, "The applause you crave won't echo in the grave." Now contrast that with modern life's distractions, endless scrolling, manufactured dramas, the obsession with curating a perfect image. The Stoics would see these as what they are, attempts to outrun the truth that time is slipping away. But here's the twist: when you stop running, you gain something extraordinary. Clarity. If today were your last, would you spend it arguing online, obsessing over a slight from a coworker? Or would you call someone you love, create something meaningful, savor the ordinary magic of being alive? That's the gift of seeing death as an equalizer. It forces you to distinguish between what's urgent and what's sacred. So here's a challenge borrowed straight from Stoic practice. Picture yourself 100 years from now. Everyone you know, everyone who knows you gone. The grudges you held, the trophies you collected, the social status you fought for, dust, what's left. That's where real living begins. The Stoics didn't dwell on death to depress themselves. They used it as a whetstone to sharpen their priorities. When you accept that the clock is ticking for everyone, suddenly, not having enough time becomes a poor excuse. You have exactly the same amount as Seneca. As Marcus Aurelius, the only question is what you'll do with it. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher who rose from slavery to become one of history's greatest teachers, had a razor-sharp method for dealing with life's uncertainties, including death. He called it the Dichotomy of Control, a simple but revolutionary idea. Some things are within our power and everything else is not. Your thoughts, your actions, your choices. Those are yours to command, but death, illness, other people's opinions, those belong to the realm of what Epictetus called externals, things we can influence but never fully control. And here's the key: suffering begins when we confuse the two. Think of it like a ship captain navigating a storm. The wind, the waves, the rain, those are beyond their control. But the angle of the sails, the steadiness of the helm, the decision to keep calm and carry on, that's where true mastery lies. Epictetus would say that fearing death is like a captain wasting energy shouting at the storm. It doesn't change the weather, it only drains the crew. His advice: focus relentlessly on what you can steer. This isn't about resignation, it's about liberation. When you stop trying to control the uncontrollable, you free up energy for what actually matters. Imagine carrying a boulder up a hill, only to realize it was never your burden to bear. That's what happens when we obsess over things like how others perceive us, whether we'll get sick or when our time will come. Epictetus taught his students to greet these realities with a shrug. If it's beyond my will, it's none of my concern. Harsh, maybe, but also incredibly freeing. So here's a question to sit with. What are you clutching too tightly that was never yours to hold? The Stoics would argue that most of our daily anxieties, the rude comment from a stranger, the looming deadline, even the inevitability of aging, are just waves crashing against a ship we've mistaken for our own. The real power lies in adjusting your sails. Death is coming for us all, yes, but between now and then, that's where your sovereignty lies. Epictetus put it best. Don't demand that events happen as you wish, but wish them to happen as they do, and you'll go on well. In other words, stop trying to calm the storm. Learn to dance in the rain instead. Seneca's sharpest insight on the shortness of life wasn't about death. It was about how we squander the time we have. Life is long enough, he wrote, if you know how to use it, but most of us don't. We fill our days with frantic activity, mistaking motion for progress, busyness for meaning. Think about the modern obsession with hustle culture, the glorification of non-stop work, the pride in sleepless nights, the endless chase for more. Seneca would have called it what it is, a distraction from living. He watched Romans climb social ladders, hoard wealth, and gossip in forums, all while complaining they had no time. Sound familiar? 2,000 years later, we're still trapped in the same illusion. That life is short because time flies, when really, it's because we let it slip through our fingers. Consider how we treat time compared to money. If someone stole your wallet, you'd react immediately. But when hours vanish into mindless scrolling, or years pass in a job that drains your soul, we shrug. That's just life. Seneca called this the ultimate poverty, wasting the one resource you can never earn back. His remedy wasn't complicated, it was radical. Stop giving your time to things that don't nourish you. Stop postponing joy for a future that may never come. You're living as if destined to live forever, he chided. No one loses the day thinking they'll lose their life. Here's the litmus test Seneca proposed. Ask yourself at day's end, what part of today belonged to me? Not to my boss, my inbox, or my endless to-do list, but to my growth, my relationships, my peace. That's the difference between spending time and investing it. The Stoics weren't against work, they were against letting work define you. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire but carved out hours for philosophy. Seneca advised his students to retire into yourself daily, to claim moments of stillness amid the chaos. So here's the challenge hiding in Seneca's words. What if you treated time like currency, budgeting it as carefully as your paycheck? What if you stopped saying, I'm too busy, and started asking, busy with what? The modern world will always demand more hours, more output, more hustle. But the Stoics whisper a counteroffer. You don't need more time, you need fewer distractions. The clock isn't your enemy, your attention is, and reclaiming it starts with one ruthless question. Are you filling your life or fulfilling it? The Stoics had a practice so counterintuitive it might sound like emotional self-sabotage at first glance. They called it Premeditatio Malorum, the premeditation of evils. Picture this: instead of distracting yourself from life's uncertainties, you deliberately visualize them in vivid detail. Losing your job, falling ill, the death of loved ones, even your own mortality. Why? Because the Stoics discovered something profound. Fear shrinks when you stare it down. By mentally rehearsing adversity, you strip it of its power to shock or paralyze you. And what's the ultimate adversity? Death. The Stoics didn't just ponder it abstractly. They walked right up to it in their minds, like gladiators stepping into the arena. History's greatest warriors understood this principle intimately. Roman gladiators trained with weighted weapons, knowing the real fight would feel lighter by comparison. Samurai meditated on their own deaths each morning, so they'd move through battle with icy clarity. The Stoics took this further, applying it to everyday life. Seneca would write letters describing how he imagined losing his wealth, his status, even his breath, not to dwell in despair, but to savor what he had while it lasted. "He who has learned to die has unlearned slavery," he declared. That's the paradox. By embracing the worst-case scenario, you become freer in the present. Here's how it works in practice. Close your eyes and picture waking up to news that changes everything. A diagnosis, a betrayal, a loss. Feel the initial sting, then ask yourself, what next? The Stoics realized most of our suffering isn't from the event itself, but from our refusal to accept it could happen. Premeditatio malorum is emotional vaccination, a small dose of imagined pain to inoculate against the real thing. Marcus Aurelius did this daily, reminding himself that his children might die, his empire could crumble, his body would fail. Not to torment himself, but to cherish them fiercely while they were his to hold. Now apply this to modern life. How would you move through your day if you knew it was your last? Would you waste an hour in traffic fuming, obsess over a stranger's rude comment? Or would you taste your coffee like it's the first sip you've ever had? Listen to your loved ones like their words were your final gift. That's the razor's edge of this practice. It doesn't just reduce fear, it amplifies gratitude. The gladiator entering the arena knows each breath could be his last, so he makes each one count. The Stoic entering the marketplace does the same. So here's the challenge hiding in Premeditatio malorum. What if you spent 1 minute each morning not avoiding your fears but greeting them? Imagine losing what you cherish most, then open your eyes to find it still here. That heartbeat of relief, that's where real living begins. The Stoics weren't preparing for death, they were rehearsing for life. And the script they left us is simple. Don't wait for loss to teach you how to love. Write that lesson now in bold strokes while the inkwell is full. Marcus Aurelius would sit in his imperial palace and write these words in his private journal. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do, say, and think. Not the musings of a depressed ruler, but the razor-sharp focus of a man who saw impermanence as his greatest teacher. The emperor who commanded legions found wisdom in the fleeting watching autumn leaves fall, observing rivers that never touch the same water twice. His genius was recognizing that everything we clutch, wealth, status, even our own bodies, is just borrowed matter waiting to return to the earth. But one thing endures: how we choose to show up while we're here. Nature was his classroom. Seasons don't beg to stay longer when winter comes. Rivers don't protest when they merge with the sea. They fulfill their purpose without clinging, a masterclass in detachment. Aurelius would watch this natural cycle and apply it to human affairs. Fame, it will fade faster than morning dew. Your villa, future generations will walk its ruins without knowing your name. But virtue, that outlasts marble monuments. Your integrity echoes in ways you'll never witness. Now contrast that with today's chase for permanence in all the wrong places. The designer clothes we hope will impress people who won't remember us. The social media posts crafted to outlive our beating hearts. We build sandcastles at high tide and act shocked when the waves come. Aurelius would ask, why pour your life into what cannot last? Here's the question he'd pose to our modern age. When your possessions crumble to dust, as they inevitably will, what's left? Not your car's make or your home's square footage, but how you treated the cashier who messed up your order. Not your job title, but the courage you showed when no one was watching. The Stoics called this the discipline of desire, training yourself to want what endures. So try this exercise from Aurelius' playbook. Walk through your home and touch each object as if it's already a relic. That phone in your hand, future archaeologists might find it buried and puzzle over its purpose. Those framed diplomas, the ink will fade before your legacy does. Now ask, if all this vanished tomorrow, who would you be? The answer lies not in what you own, but in how you've loved, created, and stood firm when storms came. That's the Stoic secret, building your life on what even death can't erase. The ancient Stoics faced death with a clarity that would baffle most of us today. While we drown our existential fears in endless scrolling, binge watching, and the frantic pursuit of distractions, Seneca observed something chilling about those who refuse to confront mortality. The man who fears death will never do anything worth living for. That's the tragic irony. By running from the one inevitability we all share, we shrink our lives into shallow routines, trading epic courage for trivial comforts. Consider how differently a Stoic approached adversity compared to modern avoidance tactics. When Epictetus's students confessed their anxieties, he didn't offer soothing platitudes or suggest meditation apps. He demanded they stare into the abyss. If you're afraid of poverty, go sleep in a thin cloak tonight. If you fear death, hold your own funeral in your mind, then live like someone who's already survived it. This wasn't cruelty, it was liberation through exposure. Modern therapy calls it systematic desensitization, but the Stoics were practicing it 2 millennia ago, not to numb themselves, but to wake themselves up. Now contrast that with today's culture of emotional insulation. We mute discomfort with notifications, medicate unease with consumerism, and treat any hint of existential dread like a glitch to be fixed. Seneca saw this coming. Men are so thoughtless, nay, so mad, that some, through fear of death, force themselves to die. He's describing the self-sabotage of a life half-lived, the career never pursued, the love never confessed, the adventure never begun, all because we're terrified of an ending we can't control. Here's the journaling prompt the Stoics would assign you tonight. Write down 3 things you'd dare to do if fear of failure, judgment, or death weren't holding you back. Then ask yourself, what's actually stopping you? The Stoic answer might sting. It's not external barriers, but your own permission slip you've been waiting for. Marcus Aurelius scribbled in his diary, "Stop letting your dying happen before your death." In other words, stop confusing breathing with being alive. The difference between ancient courage and modern anxiety isn't about toughness, it's about focus. The Stoics redirected energy wasted on what if catastrophes into what is clarity. While we doom scroll about hypothetical pandemics or political collapses, Seneca would remind us, you're terrified of dying tomorrow, but you wasted today. That's the pivot point. Real courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the presence of purpose stronger than fear. So here's the challenge hiding in their wisdom. Next time anxiety whispers, what if it all goes wrong? Counter it with the Stoic's sharper question. What if you waited too long to begin? Imagine life as a banquet where the host controls when each course arrives and when it ends. You can savor the meal or spend it dreading the final bite. That's how Epictetus framed existence, teaching his students to practice amor fati, the love of fate. Not just accepting life's inevitable end, but embracing it as part of the feast. While modern culture fights aging with creams and surgeries and mourns youth like a lost crown, the Stoics leaned into a radical idea. What if every wrinkle, every ending, even death itself, wasn't a flaw in the design, but the design itself? Think of the way we often approach life's natural transitions. A 40-year-old dyes gray hairs to appear 30. A terminally ill patient exhausts their remaining days pursuing experimental treatments. None of this is wrong, but the Stoics would ask, at what cost? Resistance to fate burns energy that could be spent savoring the present. Seneca observed, No man enjoys the taste of food while rushing to swallow it. Yet that's exactly what we do with time, gulping moments while fixated on prolonging the meal, never truly tasting what's on the plate. Epictetus took this further with his banquet metaphor. Picture a grand table laden with dishes, some you love, some you barely touch. Then the host signals the meal is over. Do you storm out, demanding more? Or do you thank them for the portions you enjoyed? That's amor fati in action, gratitude for what was, rather than rage for what wasn't. Modern culture teaches us to cling to the table long after the plates are cleared. Stoicism whispers, rise with dignity when your time comes, knowing others still hunger for their turn. Here's the paradox hidden in this practice. Acceptance isn't surrender, it's sovereignty. When you stop wrestling with what can't be changed, your age, your mortality, others' choices, you reclaim power over what can, your focus, your values, your daily actions. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The obstacle becomes the way," meaning even hardship can be fuel if you stop resisting its shape. A river doesn't argue with the rocks it flows around them, carving canyons in the process. So here's the question the Stoics would pose to our era of endless optimization. What would you stop fighting if you trusted the unfolding? Not passive resignation, but active collaboration with reality. Aging isn't decay, it's data on how long you've survived life's gauntlet. Death isn't failure, it's the final note in a symphony that gives meaning to every preceding measure. The banquet's beauty lies in its brevity. No one praises an endless feast. Try this reframe today. Instead of lamenting limitations, ask what they make possible. A candle's value isn't in burning forever, but in how brightly it illuminates while it lasts. That's the heart of amor fati, not just making peace with fate, but falling in love with its rough edges, knowing they shape the story's contours. The Stoics didn't see life as a sentence to endure, but as a gift to unwrap, one whose very fragility demands we handle it with awe. Marcus Aurelius began his mornings with a ritual more powerful than any productivity hack. Before dawn touched Rome, the emperor would open his journal and write, "When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love." This wasn't poetic fluff, it was psychological armor. By anchoring himself in gratitude before facing the chaos of empire, he turned an ordinary sunrise into a triumph. The Stoics understood something neuroscience now confirms. Death awareness doesn't have to breed anxiety, it can sharpen appreciation. When you know the sand is always falling through the hourglass, you stop waiting for perfect conditions to feel joy. This practice reveals a hidden flaw in modern mindfulness. Many meditation apps teach us to empty our minds, to seek detachment from thought. But the Stoics went deeper. They didn't just observe the present, they charged it with meaning by remembering it could vanish. Picture two people drinking coffee, one distracted by their phone, the other hyper-aware this might be their final cup. Who savors the warmth more? Who notices the aroma dancing with the steam? Seneca put it bluntly, no one is indifferent to their last meal. The Stoics weaponized that intensity, applying it to every ordinary moment. Consider how differently we experience routine pleasures when framed by mortality. A parent tucking in a child, ordinary until you imagine it's the last time. The weight of a book in your hands, mundane until you remember libraries turn to dust. This isn't morbid, it's alchemy. The Japanese call it mono no aware, the bittersweet awareness of life's transience that makes cherry blossoms more beautiful precisely because they fade. The Stoics were masters of this alchemy, transforming leaden routine into golden presence. So here's the challenge hiding in Marcus Aurelius' morning ritual. What microscopic joys are you missing right now? The way sunlight slants through your window, the rhythm of your own breath. Modern life conspires to make us spectators of our own existence. constantly filming moments instead of living them. The Stoics offer an antidote. Let death be the lens that brings life into focus. When you eat, taste. When you walk, feel. When you love, pour yourself into it completely. Not because these moments are rare, but because your attention to them is. The next time you catch yourself postponing happiness, I'll relax after this deadline. I'll travel when I retire. Remember Seneca's warning. You're arranging your life as if you're expecting to live forever. The gift of mortality isn't some distant philosophical insight. It's the urgency to need joy into ordinary dough. That's why Stoic joy feels different from fleeting pleasure. It's not dependent on circumstances, but on your willingness to meet each moment as if you've been granted a reprieve. The present doesn't become precious when conditions improve. It becomes precious when you stop treating it like a waiting room. Seneca took Stoic death rehearsal further than almost anyone. He didn't just contemplate mortality, he practiced dying. In letters to his friend Lucilius, he described treating each evening as if it were his last, reviewing the day's actions, releasing grudges, even mentally surrendering his possessions. He who dies every day, he wrote, ceases to be a slave. This wasn't hypothetical. Seneca would physically lie down in darkness, simulating his final breath. Why? To expose fear's greatest weakness, repetition. The first time you imagine losing everything, it terrifies. The 100th time, it feels like slipping into a familiar coat. Now fast forward to our digital age, where we've invented endless ways to avoid this reckoning. Infinite scroll numbs existential dread. Notifications drown out inner silence. We've replaced Seneca's nightly surrender with what one researcher calls death avoidance architecture, apps engineered to make us forget time is passing. But here's the twist: modern digital detoxes accidentally echo Stoic practice. When you voluntarily power down devices, you're not just unplugging from noise, you're creating space to ask Seneca's brutal question, what's left of me when the screens go dark? Picture two versions of yourself. Version 1 spends their last day refreshing emails, doom-scrolling news feeds, half listening to loved ones between pings. Version 2, the one whose rehearsed death turns devices to flight mode, walks barefoot in grass, holds eye contact a beat longer. Both face the same finite hours, but one moves through them like a sleepwalker, the other like someone who knows the curtain's about to fall. That's Seneca's genius. By dying daily, you stop mistaking distractions for living. This practice reveals a painful modern truth. We often confuse presence with productivity. We measure days by completed tasks rather than savored moments. Seneca would have scoffed at our bullet journals filled with errands but empty of awe. His version of dying daily wasn't about checking off moral boxes. It was about dissolving the illusion that there's always tomorrow. Roman aristocrats threw lavish banquets where skeletons were paraded between courses as Memento Mori. Our version, maybe it's setting a daily alarm labeled last hour, where you ask, if this were all I had left, would I spend it like this? So here's the experiment hiding in Seneca's letters. For one evening, live as if you've received a terminal diagnosis, not to paralyze yourself, but to clarify what's essential. Would you finally write that novel, or would you realize it was never about publication, just the joy of creating? Would you binge another series or sit silently with your child, memorizing the cadence of their laughter? Modern psychology calls this temporal distancing, a fancy term for what Stoics knew instinctively. Perspective sharpens when the clock's ticking grows loud. The real power of Seneca's exercise isn't in the dying, it's in the waking up. When you open your eyes to find the sun still rising, your hands still capable of holding, your lungs still filling with air, something shifts. The petty quarrel with your partner feels smaller, the work rejection stings less, even traffic becomes a fleeting miracle. You're here to be annoyed by it. That's the paradox. Rehearsing death doesn't make life darker. It makes ordinary light blindingly bright. Try this tonight, not as a thought experiment, but as a full sensory rehearsal. Turn off every screen, sit where moonlight pools on the floor, feel your pulse, then ask Seneca's question with your whole body. If this were my last night, what would I regret not having fully lived? The answer won't point you toward more achievements, it'll point you toward the love you withheld, the art you didn't make, the moments you rushed through. And here's the secret, you don't need a terminal diagnosis to start living that way. You just need the courage to die a little each day so you can finally, fully come alive. One of the most jarring and transformative exercises in Stoic practice involves attending your own funeral, not metaphorically, but with eyes closed and brutal honesty. The Stoics would visualize their body laid out, friends gathered, listening intently to the eulogies being spoken, not the polished tributes of polite society, but the raw, unfiltered truth. This wasn't macabre fantasy, it was a mirror held up to their deepest values. Cato the Younger, the Roman senator who became Stoicism's martyr, practiced this with chilling precision. On the night before his suicide, a final act of defiance against Caesar's tyranny, he didn't rage or weep. He dined with friends, debated philosophy, then retired to read Plato's Phaedo, a dialogue about the immortality of the soul before falling on his sword. His final act wasn't just political, it was the culmination of a life spent rehearsing integrity. What makes this exercise so powerful isn't the confrontation with death, it's the confrontation with self. When you mentally hover above your own funeral, you bypass the ego's defenses. No more excuses about busy schedules or bad luck. Just the stark question, what legacy have my daily choices actually built? The Stoics realized most of us live with a dangerous disconnect. We say we value kindness, courage, wisdom, but our autopilot actions tell a different story. The funeral drill shatters that illusion. Imagine standing invisible among your mourners. What stories would they share? Not the highlight reel you post online, but the unspoken moments, how you made them feel during their lowest hour, whether you showed up when it mattered, what you prioritized when no one was watching. The Roman Stoics had a phrase for this, sub specie eternitatis, under the aspect of eternity. It's the practice of zooming out beyond today's trivial worries to ask, when the dust settles, what will remain of my time here? Modern psychology validates this ancient hack. Studies on temporal self-distancing, mentally viewing yourself from a future perspective, show it reduces bias and clarifies priorities. CEOs use it to make better decisions. Therapists employ it to ease anxiety, but the Stoics took it further. They didn't just visit the future, they moved there permanently. Every morning, Marcus Aurelius asked himself, if today were my last, would I still do this? Every night, Seneca reviewed his day as if it were his final chapter. Here's where most self-help advice falls short. It tells you to live with purpose, without showing how to excavate that purpose from beneath layers of distraction. The funeral exercise cuts through the noise. Try it now. Picture 3 people at your graveside. What do you hope they'd say? Now the harder question. What would they say based on your last month's actions? That gap isn't failure, it's your compass. Cato's defiance wasn't impulsive. It was the ultimate test of a life spent aligning actions with principles. His contemporaries called it madness. The Stoics called it freedom, because when you've already faced the worst, when you've rehearsed your own death and interrogated your legacy, the petty fears that paralyze others lose their grip. The critic's voice just whined, the risk of failure, a necessary step, the opinion of crowds, irrelevant to the only judgment that matters, your own. So here's the challenge hidden in this uncomfortable exercise. Craft your eulogy now, not with words, but with hours. Let each day be a sentence in that speech. The Stoics knew death isn't the enemy of meaning, it's the forge, and the life well lived isn't the one that avoids the fire, but the one tempered by it. Marcus Aurelius left us a startling confession in his private journals. Stop talking about what the good man is like, be one. That simple command cuts to the core of Stoic legacy, not marble statues or glowing obituaries, but the unshakable alignment between your words and your walk. The emperor who ruled the known world obsessed less over how history would remember him than whether his shoemaker could honestly say he'd been a decent customer. That's the Stoic paradox. By releasing the hunger for posthumous fame, they built legacies that outlasted empires. Consider our modern obsession with digital immortality, curating social media profiles as if they'll endure like the pyramids, scrambling to leave our mark through viral moments or verified badges. The Stoics would have found this baffling. Epictetus mocked those who inscribed their names on stones, while their character crumbled like sand. Real legacy, he taught, isn't about controlling how others perceive you after you're gone. It's about refining what you can control, your integrity in this breath, this choice, this ordinary moment that feels anything but historic. History offers a brutal litmus test. Walk through any museum's Roman wing, you'll see countless statues of officials whose names meant everything to them and nothing to us. Their inscriptions beg visitors to remember them, yet we stroll past without a glance. Then there's Marcus' Meditations, scribbled in military tents with no intent to publish. 2 millennia later, his private struggles guide millions. That's the Stoic secret. Impact grows not from chasing remembrance, but from planting seeds of virtue whose roots outlive you. The contrast with today couldn't be sharper. We measure influence in followers and likes, mistaking visibility for value. Seneca warned about this trap. What's the point of having your name on everyone's lips if it never touches their hearts? He told of wealthy Romans who commissioned poets to write their epitaphs, then died before hearing a single line. Their money could buy flattery, but not meaning. Real legacy emerges when you stop performing for audiences living or future, and start living by principles so consistent they ripple outward unintentionally. Here's the question the Stoics would pin to your mirror today. Are you building a resume or a resonance? The former gathers dust in drawers, the latter vibrates through generations in ways you'll never witness. When Zeno founded Stoicism after losing everything in a shipwreck, he wasn't plotting his Wikipedia page, he was solving a human problem: how to suffer well. 2,000 years later, we still quote him not because he wanted to be quoted, but because he addressed something timeless. That's the alchemy of true impact. Focus on serving the present so authentically that it becomes immortal. Try this shift in perspective. Instead of asking, "How will I be remembered?" ask, "How am I helping others remember themselves?" The teacher who sparks curiosity in a child creates ripples that outlast dynasties. The neighbor whose kindness becomes someone's standard for decency sculpts the future more than any bronze statue. Marcus wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be." Be one, not for the history books, but for the cashier who needs patience today, the friend who needs honesty tonight, the stranger who'll never know your name but carries your compassion forward. Legacy isn't harvested posthumously, it's planted in unglamorous soil, sticking to values when no one's watching, choosing hard truths over easy flattery, treating small obligations like sacred vows. The Stoics knew a simple truth: you can't control who remembers you, but you can control what you give them to remember. And often, the most enduring gifts are those you never realized you were giving. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher who transformed his enslavement into a masterclass on freedom, had a radical way of reframing death, one that dismantles our deepest fears. He taught that death isn't inherently evil. It's simply a change as natural as a leaf falling in autumn or a wave returning to the sea. The pain we feel isn't from the event itself, but from our white-knuckled grip on permanence. Picture a cherished porcelain vase shattering on the floor. The fragments aren't what hurt you, it's the belief that the vase should have stayed whole. Epictetus would say our terror of mortality works the same way. We don't suffer because life ends, we suffer because we've convinced ourselves it shouldn't. This insight cracks open a profound question. What attachments are you mistaking for survival? For some, it's the career they've tied to their identity. For others, the relationships they treat as permanent anchors. Even our obsession with youth and health reveals a deeper illusion, that the body isn't meant to age, that vitality is a possession rather than a fleeting gift. Epictetus, who lived with a leg permanently crippled by his enslavement, knew this intimately. It's not things that disturb us, he taught, but our judgments about things. A storm isn't cruel for sinking a ship. The cruelty lies in our expectation that the sea should always be calm. Consider how differently we'd live if we truly internalized this. A parent watching their child leave for college might feel not emptiness, but awe at the unfolding of a life. A musician whose hands stiffen with age could celebrate the music that remains instead of raging at what's changed. This isn't resignation, it's liberation. The vase was always fragile, the gift was getting to hold it at all. Epictetus drills deeper. If you kiss your child, your wife, your friend, remind yourself you're kissing a mortal. Not to spoil the moment, but to sanctify it. The temporary nature of things isn't their flaw, it's what makes them sacred. Here's the litmus test hiding in his teachings. What would you dare to love if you knew it couldn't last? Most of us love cautiously, withholding full investment as if we could somehow cheat loss. But the Stoic approach flips the script. The very possibility of loss becomes the reason to love fiercely. Imagine two gardeners. One plants plastic flowers, fearing wilt and pests. The other cultivates roses, knowing each bloom is fleeting, yet tending them with even greater devotion. Which garden feels more alive? The modern world feeds our attachment illusions. Anti-aging creams promise to freeze time. Social media lets us curate permanent highlight reels. We've built entire industries around denying the very impermanence that gives life its flavor. Epictetus would have scoffed at our resistance to nature's rhythm. You're a soul carrying a corpse. He quipped, a blunt reminder that our bodies were never meant to be eternal trophies, but temporary vessels. The pain of losing them comes not from the design, but from our refusal to read the terms and conditions. So here's the challenge coiled in Epictetus' vase metaphor. Next time fear grips you, whether it's losing a job, a relationship, or your youth, ask not, how can I prevent this? But what story am I telling myself about what this means? The Stoics didn't avoid grief, they grieved fully, then rebuilt. They didn't deny death, they let it teach them how to kneel beside a flowering plant and inhale like it was their first and last breath all at once. That's the secret hidden in change. It's not the enemy of meaning, it's the canvas, and the artwork only emerges when we stop demanding the paint stay wet forever. Seneca watched Rome's elite scramble for statues and titles with a mix of pity and dark amusement. You're building monuments, he wrote, when you should be building character. The Stoics saw a brutal truth. Our terror of death often isn't about leaving life, it's about leaving the stage. We dread vanishing before the crowd stops applauding. Strip away the theatrics and what remains? A fragile ego that mistakes visibility for value, likes for legacy. Consider how social media amplifies this ancient anxiety. A tweet goes viral, suddenly you matter. Engagement dips, now you're scrambling for the next dopamine hit. Seneca would recognize this as the same sickness he diagnosed in Roman aristocrats polishing their tombstones instead of their virtues. The technology changes, the hunger doesn't. We've just swapped marble inscriptions for blue verification checks, chiseled epitaphs for follower counts. Both are sandcastles at high tide. Here's the Stoic acid test. Imagine waking up tomorrow to find every record of you erased, no social profiles, no name in databases, no trace in anyone's memory. Who are you then? Not the persona you perform, but the quiet self that exists when no one's watching. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire but journaled about the freedom of being. Just a grape in nature's harvest, here today, pressed into wine tomorrow, forgotten by the season after. Not self-deprecation, but liberation. When you stop conflating your worth with your visibility, death loses its sting. Modern psychology confirms this. Studies show people who tie self-esteem to external validation experience higher anxiety and lower resilience. The Stoics' remedy was radical detachment, not from ambition, but from the need for applause. Seneca took this further, advising his students to periodically dress in rags and beg in the streets, not as punishment but to prove a point. If you can bear obscurity, you've broken fame's chains. Try this reframe next time you post online. Picture archaeologists 2,000 years from now unearthing your profile. Will they see someone who mirrored popular opinions or someone who thought for themselves? The Stoics didn't reject achievement, they redefined it. A statue crumbles, but integrity echoes in ways you'll never witness. As Seneca quipped, fame is a vapor that only looks solid when you're standing downwind. The real challenge isn't quitting social media, it's quitting the mental addiction to validation. Start small, share an opinion that won't win likes. Create something only you understand. Sit with the discomfort of being misjudged. That's the gym where Stoic muscle grows, because when you stop fearing invisibility, you discover something extraordinary, the freedom to live by your own compass, even if no one ever salutes the journey. Marcus Aurelius would often walk the palace gardens at dusk, watching leaves spiral to the earth with the same reverence others reserved for sunrises. In his private writings, he marveled at how effortlessly nature surrenders what it once nurtured. Flowers don't argue with frost, nor do stars protest when dawn extinguishes their glow. What springs from earth returns to earth, he scribbled, and what's born of heaven reclaims its celestial home. This wasn't resignation, it was awe. The emperor who held more power than most dared dream found solace in life's most humbling truth. Every ending is also a homecoming. Modern culture wages silent war against this rhythm. We inject toxins to freeze facial muscles, spend billions fighting wrinkles as if they're invaders rather than time's gentle signatures. The Stoics would find this baffling. Not because aging is easy, Epictetus acknowledged its aches, but because resisting it violates the very laws that make existence coherent. Imagine a river raging against its own current, or a tree refusing to shed leaves in autumn. That's the absurdity of our denial. Marcus framed it plainly. To reject nature's cycles is to reject your own breath. There's a quiet rebellion hidden in this acceptance. When you stop treating aging as decay and start seeing it as the natural cost of admission, the price paid for sunrises witnessed, laughter shared, lessons earned, fear loosens its grip. The Japanese concept of wabi-sabi celebrates this. Cracks in pottery aren't flaws but proof of use, valued more for having been loved. Marcus took it further, viewing his own aging body as a well-worn cloak, threadbare perhaps, but rich with stories only where could tell. Consider how differently we'd move through life if we emulated nature's non-attachment. A cherry blossom's beauty peaks precisely as it begins to fall. Tides don't cling to the shore, they trust their return. Even grief, when viewed through this lens, transforms. The Stoics grieved deeply. Seneca wrote wrenching letters after losing his son, but they also recognized mourning as the shadow side of love's privilege. To weep because something ended is to confirm it mattered. That's the paradox. By making peace with endings, we honor the depth of what was. Here's the question coiled in Marcus' Garden Meditations. What if your fears about aging and death aren't warnings to flee, but invitations to look closer? A forest doesn't fear autumn because it knows dormancy isn't oblivion, it's preparation for a different kind of bloom. Modern medicine can add years to life, but Stoic wisdom asks whether we're adding life to those years. The emperor who ruled Rome's golden age spent his final days writing not of conquests, but of the peace found in aligning with nature's cadence. His last recorded words weren't a plea for more time, but gratitude for time's perfect choreography. The universe is change, life is understanding. Try this shift today. When you notice a new line on your face or feel a pang about passing time, pause. Trace that line like a cartographer mapping well-traveled terrain. Each wrinkle is evidence of storms weathered, smiles exchanged, wisdom hard-won. The Stoics didn't surrender to time, they collaborated with it, trusting that what makes a life meaningful isn't its length, but its harmony with the greater rhythm. After all, even the moon knows waning isn't weakness. It's just another phase in becoming whole. The Stoics didn't just brace for loss, they rehearsed it with the precision of musicians practicing scales. Seneca, who wrote heartbreaking letters to grieving friends, had a radical approach to preparing the heart: love fully, but hold loosely. His letters of consolation weren't hollow platitudes, they were masterclasses in emotional resilience. To a mother mourning her son, he didn't say, "Time heals." Instead, he asked her to recall that every kiss, every laugh, every bedtime story was always on borrowed time, and that this fragility was what made those moments sacred. The Stoics understood a truth we often avoid. Grief isn't the price of love, but its inevitable shadow. And rather than fearing that shadow, they learned to walk beside it. Modern culture treats grief like a glitch in the system, something to be fixed with distraction, medication, or frantic positivity. We scroll past suffering, mute mourning, and label deep sadness as toxic. Seneca would have called this cowardice disguised as self-care. His letters reveal a startling alternative. By mentally rehearsing loss, we don't numb ourselves, we amplify our capacity to cherish. Imagine two parents tucking in their child. One pushes away thoughts of tragedy, clinging to the illusion of permanence. The other acknowledges the unspoken truth that this could be the last good night, and lets that awareness sharpen their presence. Which bedtime feels more alive? Here's the paradox the Stoics uncovered. When you stop demanding guarantees, you start noticing miracles. Seneca advised his friend Marcia to meditate not just on her son's death, but on the years before his birth, the vast absence from which he briefly emerged. He was given, not promised, he reminded her. This wasn't cruelty, it was the key to transforming grief from a wrecking ball into a compass. By accepting that everyone we love is already halfway out the door, we stop postponing the love that could be given today. Consider how differently we'd navigate relationships if we embraced this mindset. The partner we take for granted becomes someone we truly see. The aging parent stories we used to tune out suddenly feel like rare artifacts. Even conflicts soften. Why waste irreplaceable hours resenting someone whose absence would hollow you out? Modern therapists call this anticipatory grief, but the Stoics framed it more powerfully: preemptive gratitude. So here's the challenge coiled in Seneca's letters. What if you loved like an archaeologist handling fragile scrolls, with care, reverence, and the awareness that every touch could be the last? Not to live in dread, but to dissolve the numbness of routine. The parent who knows their child will one day leave home reads bedtime stories with more patience. The friend who remembers time's finiteness picks up the phone instead of postponing the call. Even the act of disagreeing shifts. You argue to understand, not to win. This isn't about morbid fixation. It's about alchemizing fear into presence. The Stoics grieved deeply. Seneca himself wept openly when losing friends, but they refused to let grief blind them to the privilege of having loved at all. That's the secret buried in their preparation. By making peace with endings, we don't diminish love's intensity. We finally stop holding it at arm's length. Try this today. Hug someone while mentally whispering, "This won't last forever." Feel how your arms tighten, your attention sharpens. The moment crystallizes into something too vivid to forget. That's not loss, that's love distilled to its essence. Marcus Aurelius had a secret weapon against anxiety, one he practiced under starry Roman skies. He called it the view from above, a mental exercise where you zoom out from your life until cities become specks, empires fade to dust, and your greatest fears shrink to their true size. Picture this: you're floating above Earth, watching centuries pass like flickering frames. The wars that once shook nations, mere blips, the kings who demanded statues. Forgotten shadows, your own struggles, a single thread in a vast tapestry. This wasn't escapism, it was perspective alchemy. The emperor who bore the weight of an empire would whisper to himself, "Think of the whole universe and how small your share of it is." Modern science accidentally validates this ancient hack. Astronauts report the overview effect, a profound shift in consciousness when seeing Earth from space. Borders vanish, petty conflicts feel absurd. What the Stoics achieved through imagination, space travelers confirm visually. Zoom out far enough, and most of what we fear becomes cosmically insignificant. Your job stress, that awkward encounter, the criticism keeping you awake from Saturn's rings, they'd be invisible. The Stoics didn't need rocket ships, they trained their minds to orbit daily. Here's how to practice it today. Close your eyes and ascend mentally, first above your neighborhood, then your country, until continents shrink to puzzle pieces. Watch human history fast forward. Pyramids built and buried, forests swallowing cities, new civilizations rising over old graves. Now locate yourself in this panorama. That argument you're replaying, it won't echo past next Tuesday. The failure haunting you, it's already dissolving in time's river. What remains are choices aligned with something larger, kindness that outlasts empires, courage that inspires unseen generations. The magic lies in what happens when you return. Problems don't vanish, but their grip softens. That deadline, still real, but no longer world-ending. The gossip stinging you, flickering static in humanity's grand transmission. Marcus used this to endure betrayal, plague, and war. Soon you'll be ashes or bones, he'd remind himself. Not to despair, but to focus. Is this how I want to spend my brief flicker of light? Try this reframe next time stress mounts. Will this matter to the version of you watching sunset at 80? To the archaeologists unearthing our era in 2,000 years, the Stoics realized most suffering comes from overestimating our spotlight in the cosmic theater. Zoom out and you'll spot the irony. We fear being forgotten while fretting over things even we won't remember next year. What makes this exercise so potent isn't just shrinking problems, it's expanding meaning. Seen from the stars, your acts of integrity aren't small. They're rare sparks of consciousness in a vast universe. That patience with a struggling colleague. A rebellion against entropy. The bread you shared with a hungry stranger, a tiny echo of the universe's generosity. The view from above doesn't diminish your life, it reveals how precious your chapter is in the infinite story. So tonight, step outside, look up, Let the constellations remind you, your worries are temporary, but your capacity to rise above them, that's the closest thing to eternity we'll ever touch. Seneca saw sudden death not as a tragedy, but as nature's mercy, a swift exit before the body weakens, the mind fades, or the spirit tires. He wrote to his friend Lucilius with startling candor, "The best death is the one that surprises us while we're still ourselves." For a man who witnessed Rome's elite cling to life through agonizing declines, this wasn't cold philosophy, it was compassion. Picture a fruit falling ripe from the tree versus one left to wither on the branch. Seneca argued that just as we prefer fruit at its peak, so too should we embrace life's conclusion when our essence remains intact. Now contrast that with modern medicine's triumphs and dilemmas. Today, we can stretch the human lifespan far beyond natural limits, but often at a cost. Machines breathe for bodies that no longer recognize loved ones. Procedures prolong existence while eroding personhood. Seneca would have questioned our definition of saving someone. Is it truly victory when we extend years but lose the self? He watched wealthy Romans spend fortunes on dubious elixirs, only to become hollow versions of who they once were. His verdict was brutal. It's not life if there's no living in it. This tension between quantity and quality of life isn't just philosophical, it's deeply personal. Imagine two scenarios. One, a vibrant artist collapses mid-stroke, leaving a canvas vibrant with unfinished genius. Another spends a decade fading in sterile rooms, their brilliance dulled by medication and memory loss. Modern culture treats the first as tragic, the second as brave. But the Stoics flip the script. Sudden death preserves integrity. Prolonged decline risks reducing a person to their least dignified chapters. Here's the uncomfortable question Seneca forces us to confront. Are we fighting for life or just against death? There's nobility in battling illness, but also wisdom in recognizing when the battle has shifted from preserving a person to maintaining a pulse. Ancient Romans practiced voluntary euthanasia for the terminally ill, seeing it as a final act of autonomy. Today, we often view such choices through lenses of fear or guilt rather than agency. Yet there's nuance. For some, extra months mean witnessing a grandchild's birth or reconciling with estranged family. Seneca wasn't advocating recklessness. He was highlighting the paradox of preparing endlessly for a life we're too busy prolonging to actually live. His letters describe wealthy men too consumed by health regimens to enjoy feasts, too obsessed with longevity to appreciate mornings. So here's the journal prompt hidden in Seneca's challenge. If you knew your death would be sudden, what would you stop postponing today? And if you suspected it would be slow, what would you prioritize preserving, your body's function or your mind's clarity? The Stoics didn't claim to have answers, only the courage to ask. Their gift was reminding us that a good death isn't about timing, but about having lived in ways that make timing irrelevant. The Stoics weren't just solemn philosophers clutching their togas in existential dread. They were masters of disarming fear with razor-sharp wit. Take Diogenes, the philosopher who lived in a barrel and told Alexander the Great to stop blocking his sunlight. When asked where he wanted to be buried, he deadpanned, "Just throw me outside the city walls, the animals will take care of the rest." No solemn eulogies, no marble tombs, just a cheeky reminder that death is nature's most efficient recycler. This wasn't nihilism, it was liberation through laughter. The Stoics realized that when you can joke about the inevitable, you strip it of its power to paralyze you. Imagine applying that same levity to modern anxieties. We tiptoe around mortality like it's a sleeping dragon, whispering about wills and funerals as if saying the words might summon the reaper. But the Stoics would have rolled their eyes at our solemnity. Seneca, even while consoling grieving friends, sprinkled his letters with dark humor. "You're upset because you lost someone. Be grateful you had them to lose. Brutal, maybe, but there's a perverse comfort in that reframe. It turns grief from a punishment into proof of love's depth. Here's the secret hiding in their humor. Laughter doesn't trivialize death, it tames it. Think of how comedians roast life's absurdities: awkward first dates, terrible bosses, bad haircuts. The moment we laugh at something, it loses its fangs. The Stoics did this with mortality centuries before stand-up specials. Marcus Aurelius, despite ruling an empire, wrote self-deprecating lines like, "Soon you'll be ashes or bones, maybe just a name or not even that." Not to wallow, but to chuckle at the cosmic joke. We're temporary beings fretting over permanence. Now picture bringing this mindset to daily struggles. That job interview you're stressing over, imagine Diogenes snarking, "Relax, in 100 years, neither of you will remember it." The petty argument with your partner. Channel Seneca's wit, "You're fighting over who left the dishes unwashed. How adorable, soon enough, neither of you will have hands to wash them." The humor isn't meant to dismiss your concerns, but to shrink them to their proper size. So here's the challenge tucked into their ancient punchlines. What fear could you disarm today by laughing at it? Modern psychology backs this up. Studies show gallows humor helps surgeons cope with stress and soldiers endure combat. The Stoics were early adopters of a timeless truth. When you stop treating life's heaviest truths with solemn reverence, you free up energy to actually live. Try this reframe next time anxiety whispers in your ear. Picture your fear as a cartoon villain, complete with a silly mustache and squeaky voice. Suddenly, it's harder to take seriously. The real power of Stoic humor lies in its rebellion. While most cultures treat death as either a tragedy or a taboo, they cracked jokes about it like old friends teasing each other at a tavern. That's the ultimate flex, facing life's only certainty with a smirk instead of a scream. Because in the end, whether you spend your days trembling at shadows or laughing in their face, the outcome's the same. The difference: one leaves you clutching your pearls, the other lets you live like someone who's already peeked behind the curtain and realized the show was always meant to be a comedy. Marcus Aurelius once wrote in his private journal, "At dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, 'I am rising to do the work of a human being.'" This wasn't just morning motivation, it was a revolutionary way to frame existence. The emperor who ruled Rome's golden age saw duty not as a burden, but as the ultimate antidote to existential dread. While we scroll through news feeds wondering if our lives matter, Aurelius anchored himself in action, the simple, profound act of showing up. His genius was linking mortality to purpose, not by denying death's reality, but by letting it clarify what deserves our limited time. Consider the modern epidemic of "what's the point?" Paralysis. We hover over career choices paralyzed by infinite options, agonize over relationships as if perfection exists, and treat hobbies like auditions for future fame. The Stoic approach cuts through this fog with surgical precision. Aurelius didn't ask whether his work would echo through centuries. He asked whether it served the present moment. Governing justly, listening attentively, responding to cruelty with reason. These weren't grand gestures. They were daily disciplines made sacred by their context, a life that would end. Here's the pivot point most miss. Duty isn't about longevity, but integrity. A nurse changing bandages during a plague doesn't wonder if her efforts will eradicate disease. She knows each careful touch lessens suffering now. A teacher explaining fractions to restless children isn't banking on Nobel Prizes from his students. He's honoring the sacred transaction of knowledge passed between generations. Aurelius called this "what's human," not changing the world single-handedly, but tending your corner of it with unwavering presence. Now contrast that with today's crisis of meaning. We chase passion as if it's a destination, mistaking excitement for purpose. The Stoics redefined passion as passio, the capacity to endure what matters. Aurelius' meditations weren't written in a palace throne room, but in military tents during grueling campaigns. His duty wasn't glamorous, it was showing up battle after battle, decree after decree, knowing no effort could guarantee Rome's eternity. That's the Stoic secret. Impact isn't measured in permanence, but in the quality of your attention to the task before you. So here's the journal prompt Aurelius would slide across the table today. Strip away the fantasy of endless tomorrows. Forget legacy, forget applause. In this breath, with these hands, what's yours to do? Maybe it's drafting that email with care instead of resentment. Perhaps it's truly hearing your child's rambling story instead of mentally compiling a grocery list. Duty shrinks from overwhelming to achievable when we stop demanding it be eternal. The modern world worships the extraordinary while neglecting the essential. We dream of viral fame but ignore the neighbor who needs a meal. Aurelius saw this clearly. You're not failing by being unknown. You're failing if you don't do what your nature requires. That requirement isn't grandeur, it's showing up where you're planted, whether you're an emperor or a potter. When death sits at the table, pretense evaporates. What remains is the quiet truth. Meaning wasn't hiding in some distant achievement, but in the ordinary work of being human, one conscious act at a time. Try this refrain tonight. As you turn off the lights, ask not, did I change the world today? But did I meet the world with my full humanity? That's the Stoic compass. The irony, lives built on those small, perfect offerings often end up changing everything, not because they aimed to, but because they chose to rise and do what was theirs to do, day after fleeting day. Seneca once described true friendship as two souls occupying the same space in time, each holding up a mirror to the other's mortality. For the Stoics, the awareness of life's brevity wasn't just a personal practice, it was the glue that bound their community. Picture the Roman Stoic circles, philosophers, slaves, emperors, and merchants gathering not to escape death, but to confront it together. In those candlelit discussions, social hierarchies crumbled. What mattered wasn't status, but the raw honesty of mutual recognition that every laugh shared, every debate sparked, every silent moment of understanding was fleeting. That vulnerability became their superpower. Modern psychology reveals something startling. Nothing deepens human connection like shared impermanence. Soldiers in trenches form lifelong bonds in months. Survivors of disasters describe relationships forged in crisis as the most authentic of their lives. The Stoics engineered this intentionally. Seneca wrote to his friend Lucilius, "Hold every conversation as if it were your last, for one day it will be." Not to instill fear, but to strip away pretense. When you know time is limited, you skip the small talk and ask, what truly aches in your heart? You listen not to reply, but to witness. Consider how differently we engage when operating from this mindset. That coworker you only discuss spreadsheets with, imagine learning they've survived a cancer scare. Suddenly, conversations shift to legacy, regrets, dreams deferred. The Stoics would argue, why wait for tragedy to grant permission to go deep? Epictetus taught his students to approach every interaction as if wearing funeral clothes, not to mourn but to signal. This matters too much for half-heartedness. Here's the question coiled in their wisdom. Who in your life reminds you, through their presence, their words, their way of being, that time is a non-renewable resource? Maybe it's the friend who drags you hiking at dawn instead of complaining about Monday mornings, the grandparent who shares family stories with urgency as if passing a baton. Even the barrister who remembers your name and asks about your dreams with your coffee order. These are modern Stoic nodes people who, consciously or not, embody Memento Mori in how they connect. The irony, our digital age offers more connection than ever, yet less of this raw vulnerability. Group chats buzz endlessly, but how many exchanges would withstand the test? Would I say this if one of us died tomorrow? Seneca lamented this even in ancient Rome. We dine together like immortal gods, discussing chariot races while our souls starve. His remedy was radical presence. He'd host dinner parties where guests shared one personal regret and one unrealized hope, a practice that transformed polite gatherings into soul-altering encounters. Try this reframe today. Look at your inner circle not through the lens of convenience or longevity, but through Seneca's funeral test. If you stood at their graveside, what would you wish you'd said or done differently? Now here's the Stoic twist. Act on it while you still can. Text the mentor whose advice changed your trajectory. Forgive the sibling over that decade-old grudge. Tell your creative collaborator how their belief in you kept your dreams alive. The ancient Stoic circles thrived because they treated every meeting like a reunion and a farewell simultaneously. This isn't about morbid fixation, it's about relational alchemy. When Marcus Aurelius lost his closest friend and advisor, Junius Rusticus, he didn't just mourn, he wrote, "From him, I learned to befriend my own impermanence through his." That's the secret hidden in Stoic community. By acknowledging the clock is ticking for everyone you love, you stop waiting for someday to show your hand. The deepest bonds aren't forged in the certainty of endless tomorrows, but in the fierce tenderness of knowing tomorrow isn't promised. So here's the invitation woven through Seneca's letters. Don't just seek friends who make life longer. Cultivate those who make it deeper by their willingness to say, "We won't have this forever, so let's have all of it now." The conversation that changes your life might be the one you initiate today. Not because you have time to spare, but because you finally accepted that none of us do. Epictetus, the philosopher who turned his enslavement into a masterclass on freedom, had a brutal metaphor for our fear of death. It chains us tighter than any prison ever could. Picture a man pacing his cell, rattling the bars, screaming at the guards, all while the door stands wide open behind him. That's how most of us live, he'd say. We're so fixated on avoiding the inevitable that we miss the staggering truth. Acceptance is the key that's been in our pocket all along. For a man who spent his youth in literal chains, this wasn't theoretical, it was the lived revelation that true captivity happens between the ears. He drilled this home with a question that still cuts through centuries. Why weep over parts of life when the whole of it calls for tears? Not to depress his students, but to wake them up. The god who whipped Epictetus could bruise his skin, but only he could enslave his mind. By extension, death only holds power over us if we treat it like a jailer instead of a natural horizon. Modern psychology echoes this. Studies show that those who confront mortality directly report higher life satisfaction, as if staring into the abyss somehow fills their lungs with more air. Consider the mental prisons we build with this fear, postponing dreams for a someday that might not come, staying in unfulfilling relationships because loneliness feels like a greater terror than stagnation, or grinding through joyless careers to stockpile resources for a future we're not guaranteed. Epictetus would call this the ultimate self-betrayal, living as a fugitive from reality. His remedy was radical ownership. Freedom isn't secured by filling your coffers, but by emptying your fears. Here's the twist hiding in his teachings. When you stop fighting death's inevitability, you start winning at life's possibilities. Imagine two climbers on a mountain. One obsesses over the drop below, freezing at every ledge. The other acknowledges the danger but keeps moving, savoring vistas the fearful climber misses. Both face the same cliff, only one experiences the climb. That's the Stoic pivot, not denying mortality, but letting it sharpen your focus on the present handhold. Epictetus took this further with his famous broken vase exercise. If a cherished vase shattered, most people would grieve its loss. The Stoic asks, did you truly believe it wouldn't break? The grief stems not from the event, but from our delusion of permanence. Apply that to life. If we stopped pretending we're immortal, we'd waste less time on trivial wounds and petty grievances. The co-worker's slight or the traffic jam that ruined your morning becomes laughably small against the backdrop of life's fleetingness. So here's the key rattling in your pocket today. What mental prison does your fear construct? Is it the belief that you must achieve X before you can rest? That you'll finally start living once Y happens? Epictetus would drag that illusion into the light. You're not waiting for life to begin, you're arguing with its terms. The moment you accept that the ride ends for everyone, the quality of your ride transforms. Conversations deepen, procrastination weakens, courage feels less like a leap and more like the only sane response to limited time. The ultimate freedom isn't escaping death, it's realizing death was never the warden. It's the natural conclusion to a story that gets richer the more we acknowledge its final page. Epictetus, who could have justifiably spent his life raging at fortune for making him a slave, chose instead to declare, I may wear chains, but my mind remains unconquered. That's the invitation here, to stop confusing the prison walls with the sky beyond them. The doors unlocked, walk through. Marcus Aurelius often pictured life as a rushing river, carrying leaves, twigs, even entire trees toward an inevitable merge with the sea. His journals return to this image again and again, not with dread, but with something closer to relief. The universe is change, he wrote, life is opinion. At first glance, that second phrase seems cryptic, but unpack it, and you'll find the Stoic key to liberation. Suffering isn't in the river's flow, but in our white-knuckled grip on the branches passing by. Think of how we treat time. We mourn faded youth as if it were stolen rather than spent. We hoard possessions like they're extensions of our souls. Even relationships sometimes become prisons, clinging to people who have outgrown us, or roles that no longer fit, simply because the alternative is facing the current's pull. The Stoics proposed a radical alternative. What if letting go isn't loss, but cooperation with nature's intelligence? A tree doesn't weep when autumn strips its leaves. It knows dormancy isn't oblivion, it's preparation for a different kind of bloom. This isn't passive surrender, it's active trust. Seneca captured it perfectly in his letters. We are born into a world where nothing is ours except the moment we're in. He wasn't denying love or ambition. He was exposing the illusion that we can own anything permanently. Try this exercise. Hold an object you cherish, a wedding ring, a childhood book, your phone. Now imagine placing it on a table and saying aloud, this was never truly mine. It's passing through my hands for a time. Feel that subtle shift. That's the weight of ownership dissolving into gratitude for temporary stewardship. Modern psychology confirms the cost of clinging. Studies on psychological inflexibility show that rigid attachment to outcomes, whether in careers, relationships, or self-image, correlates with higher anxiety and lower resilience. The Stoics were pioneers of the opposite approach, negative capability, the skill of resting in uncertainty without demanding guarantees. Picture two travelers, one white-knuckling the train's armrest, angry at every jolt, the other watching landscapes blur past with curiosity. Both cover the same distance, only one enjoys the ride. So here's the question coiled in Marcus River metaphor. What are you treating as a permanent anchor that's actually driftwood? That grudge you've nursed for years, does it protect you or just tether you to the past? The career title you chase, will it satisfy or simply reset the hunger? Even the fear of death itself, is it a warning signal or the very chain Epictetus promised we could unshackle? The irony is this: by loosening our grip, we don't lose what matters, we finally see it clearly. A child holds sand so tightly it slips through their fingers. Open the palm and the grains rest there, glinting in the sun. The Stoics recognized that all love, all joy, all meaning exists precisely because nothing lasts. That's why their journals overflow not with despair, but with astonished praise for cherry blossoms, friendships, even hardships, all the more precious for their fleetingness. Try this refrain today. When anxiety whispers, "Don't let go," answer with Marcus' reminder, "You're holding onto a river." The release you fear may be the very current that carries you to deeper waters. After all, no one steps into the same river twice, not because the river isn't there, but because you've changed in the crossing. Seneca sliced through our illusions of ownership with a metaphor that still stings 2,000 years later. Life isn't a possession, it's a loan. Picture borrowing a priceless heirloom from a friend. You'd cradle it with care, polish it daily, return it undamaged. That's how the Stoics approached existence. Every sunrise was currency drawn from an unknown balance, every interaction a chance to honor the lender, whether you called that fate, nature, or the divine. Compare that to modern entitlement, where we rage when Wi-Fi lags as if the universe owes us seamless convenience. Seneca watched Romans hoard wealth and power like dragons atop gold piles, and he issued a brutal wake-up call. You don't own the gold, you're just squatting on it until the landlord returns. This shifts everything. If life's a loan, then time isn't yours to waste, it's yours to steward. Imagine two neighbors given identical gardens. One neglects the soil, lets weeds choke the flowers, then blames the seasons when harvests fail. The other tends each row knowing the land could be reclaimed any day. Who grows richer in the tending? Modern culture trains us to act like the first neighbor, postponing joy for retirement, mistaking busyness for cultivation, as if we've been granted immortality by default. Seneca's letters expose this as delusion. You act like owners when you're tenants, like immortals when you're guests. Now apply this to how we treat our bodies. Gym memberships promise forever youth. Diets sell ageless vitality, as if decay were a glitch rather than the loan's fine print. The Stoics trained their physiques not to cheat time, but to honor its strong vessels for noble work, not trophies to preserve under glass. When Seneca's own health failed, he wrote not of betrayal, but of settling debts. The body isn't a temple we built, it's a leased cathedral, and the altar's still holy even as the walls crumble. Relationships transform under this lens too. Modern love often demands permanence, forever vows, jealousy over changing affections. But if each connection is borrowed, doesn't that make every honest conversation, every vulnerable moment more sacred? Epictetus took this further. When you kiss your child, whisper to yourself, "Tomorrow I may have to give you back," not to spoil the joy, but to distill it. We don't own people, we're granted seasons with them. The parent who knows this doesn't love less, they hover less, control less, and witness more. Here's the journal prompt Seneca would slide across your screen, live the next hour as if you've received a recall notice. Not with frantic bucket listing, but with the quiet precision of someone returning a masterpiece to its rightful owner. Would you refresh your inbox that final time, or would you step outside and let the wind remind you you're alive? The meeting you're dreading, would you sit there resentful, or would you find one kernel of truth to exchange? Loans come due unexpectedly, but the Stoics discovered a paradox. The more consciously you prepare to surrender something, the more fully you get to inhabit it. The modern world screams that more is always better: more years, more stuff, more followers. Seneca's ledger flips the script. Richness isn't in the accumulation, but in the artful stewardship of what's passing through your hands. A library book read with full attention becomes more yours than a shelf of untouched bestsellers. A single meal shared with undivided presence nourishes more than a dozen distracted dinners. That's the alchemy of the lone mindset. It doesn't diminish your life. It reveals how much was always yours to live. The Stoics practiced a striking discipline when it came to death, not just in how they faced it, but in how little they spoke of what might follow. While other ancient philosophies wove elaborate tales of underworlds and reincarnation, Stoic texts are conspicuously silent on the afterlife. Marcus Aurelius wrote simply, "If there are gods, death is nothing to fear." If there are none, then death is merely the absence of sensation. No pearly gates, no fiery punishment, just an unflinching focus on the only reality we can truly know, the present moment. This wasn't evasion, it was liberation from unanswerable questions that could otherwise paralyze a life. Now contrast that with modern spiritual anxiety. Podcasts dissect near-death experiences like cosmic treasure maps. Self-help gurus sell certainty about the other side as if it were a downloadable app. Even secular culture obsesses over legacy, desperate for some proof we'll outlast our bodies. The Stoics would find this exhausting, like sailors so fixated on mapping the ocean floor they forget to trim the sails. Epictetus dismissed afterlife speculation with characteristic bluntness. Why strain to see what's behind the curtain when the play in front of you demands your full attention? There's radical power in this restraint. By refusing to decorate death with mythology, the Stoics forced themselves, and us, to confront its raw utility, mortality as a lens to clarify priorities. Imagine two travelers approaching a fork in the road. One obsesses over what lies beyond the horizon, paralyzed by possibilities. The other studies the ground beneath her feet, choosing the path that aligns with her values right now. That's the Stoic difference. Their silence on the afterlife wasn't nihilism. It was the ultimate act of presence. Consider how this plays out in daily life. The executive delaying retirement to build a bigger nest egg, just in case, versus the one who steps down to mentor young entrepreneurs, unconcerned with whether anyone remembers his name. The parent fretting over children's college admissions decades away versus one who kneels to build Lego towers today, fully immersed in the clumsy magic of small hands. Uncertainty about tomorrow becomes irrelevant when you're wholly invested in now. Here's the question buried in their silence. What would you stop over-engineering if you accepted that some mysteries aren't meant to be solved? Modern spirituality often commodifies certainty, selling visions of the afterlife as comfort blankets. But the Stoics discovered a paradox. True peace comes not from knowing what's next, but from releasing the need to know. Seneca described it as the freedom of a sailor who doesn't demand calm seas, only a sturdy ship. This isn't about rejecting wonder. It's about redirecting that energy from the unchangeable to the actionable. The Stoics channeled the human longing for transcendence into something more immediate: moral progress. While others prayed for favorable judgment in the next life, they focused on judging themselves fairly in this one. Marcus Aurelius' journal entries don't beg for posthumous rewards. They ruthlessly audit whether he showed up with integrity each day. Try this shift today. When anxiety about the unknown arises, whether it's afterlife questions or simpler uncertainties like career pivots or health outcomes, ask not, "What if?" but "What now?" The first traps you in hypotheticals, the second anchors you in agency. The Stoic approach to death's mystery mirrors how we might handle a power outage. Instead of cursing the darkness, we light candles where we stand, illuminating just enough of the path to take the next step. Their legacy whispers a counterintuitive truth. Sometimes the most profound wisdom lies not in answers, but in the courage to dwell comfortably in the unknown. After all, a life well lived needs no sequel to justify its plot. The meaning was in the living all along. Marcus Aurelius filled his private journals with the most unglamorous moments: patience with a bickering senator, kindness to a forgetful servant, resisting the urge to check his phone during meetings, or rather, the ancient Roman equivalent of scrolls and messengers. For history's most powerful man, greatness wasn't found in battlefield victories or architectural marvels, but in the quiet fidelity to small, virtuous acts. He wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one today, in the next 5 minutes, with whoever's in front of you." That's the Stoic secret hiding in plain sight. Mortality doesn't demand grand gestures, it sanctifies the mundane. Consider how we usually approach self-improvement. We draft elaborate 5-year plans, bookmark inspirational quotes about changing the world, then feel paralyzed when Monday morning arrives. Aurelius would have called this building castles in the sky while your actual house crumbles. His meditations obsess over microscopic victories, choosing honesty when a white lie would have been easier, offering help without being asked, even something as simple as getting out of bed promptly instead of hitting snooze. These weren't trivial, they were the emperor's daily rebellion against entropy. Every minor act of integrity stacked like invisible bricks, constructing an unshakable inner citadel. Now link this to mortality's urgency. We assume we'll have time for dramatic acts of courage, the heroic career pivot at 40, the reconciliation with estranged family on some vague someday. But death laughs at our delusions of a grand finale. Aurelius knew the truth. The end often comes mid-sentence, not at the climax. That's why his philosophy drills down on immediacy. Didn't write the novel, start with 1 paragraph today. Dream of volunteering but too busy. Buy coffee for the exhausted cashier now. The Stoic antidote to existential dread isn't bucket lists, it's recognizing that the atoms of a meaningful life are already in your hands. Think of a stonecutter shaping a boulder. Each strike seems insignificant until the 1,000th blow splits the rock. Modern culture glorifies the final blow. Stoicism honors every swing. When Aurelius disciplined himself to listen fully to tedious advisors instead of mentally rehearsing rebuttals, he wasn't just being polite, he was training for the moment when real stakes demanded his undivided attention. Small acts are the gym where moral muscle grows. Here's the challenge coiled in his wisdom. What microscopic victory awaits your choosing today? Not change my entire life, but reply to that difficult email with grace instead of resentment. Not save the planet, but pick up 1 piece of litter without needing applause. The urgency of death isn't here to scare you into drastic overhauls. It's whispering that the smallest choices compound faster than you think. Aurelius ruled during a plague that wiped out 1/3 of Rome. He knew better than most how abruptly lights go out. Yet his journals don't dwell on speeches he wished he'd given or monuments left unbuilt. They fixate on moments anyone could replicate, choosing kindness after a sleepless night, admitting ignorance instead of bluffing, even something as humble as drinking water slowly enough to actually taste it. That's the radical proposition. Your epitaph won't list the dreams you postponed, it'll reflect the integrity you practiced in unrecorded moments. So try this reframe. Next time you're paralyzed by the gap between your ideals and reality, ask not, what grand mission will give my life meaning? But what tiny fracture in my character can I mend before sunset? The emperor who held the world's mightiest army believed true conquest began with mastering a single thought, a solitary breath, 1 uncelebrated act of courage small enough to fit in the space between heartbeats. After all, the river of time isn't crossed in leaps. It's navigated one deliberate step at a time, knowing each ripple matters precisely because the current never stops moving. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher who walked with a permanent limp from his years in slavery, turned his disability into a masterclass on resilience. Lameness is an impediment to the leg, he taught, but not to the will. This wasn't empty positivity, it was a radical reframing of what true strength looks like. While most of us view illness as an enemy to defeat, the Stoics saw it as a training ground for the mind. Picture a soldier who prepares for battle not by wishing away the war, but by drilling in all weather conditions. That's the Stoic approach to frailty, not avoiding it, but building muscles that work even when the body fails. Consider how modern culture treats health. We chase immortality through biohacks and supplements, treating the body like a machine we can upgrade indefinitely. The Stoics proposed a different path. What if we stopped viewing sickness as a glitch in the system and started seeing it as part of the system itself? Seneca, who suffered chronic asthma, wrote letters about gasping for breath as if it were a philosophical exercise. Each attack reminds me that life is on loan. For him, illness wasn't just suffering, it was a tutor in impermanence, forcing him to value each unrestricted breath. Here's the paradox they uncovered. Preparing for frailty doesn't weaken you, it immunizes you against future shock. Marcus Aurelius ruled Rome while battling chronic pain, yet his journals reveal no self-pity, only steely resolve. The obstacle becomes the way. He didn't waste energy raging against his ailments. He used them as whetstones to sharpen his discipline. Modern research validates this approach. Patients who mentally rehearse coping with worst-case health scenarios often handle actual illness with greater resilience. The Stoics were practicing cognitive behavioral therapy 2 millennia before it had a name. Try this shift in perspective. Next time you feel a cold coming on, resist the instinct to curse your bad luck. Instead, treat it as a drill for greater challenges. How patiently can you endure discomfort? Can you find moments of grace between sneezes? Even something as minor as a headache becomes an opportunity to exercise what Epictetus called the art of acquiescence, not passive surrender, but conscious cooperation with reality. The athlete who trains in weighted vests finds normal running effortless. Likewise, the mind that practices resilience during small ailments builds strength for life's heavier blows. The real power of this practice emerges when facing serious illness. Stoic students were taught to differentiate between physical pain and mental suffering, the first inevitable, the second optional. Imagine 2 patients receiving the same diagnosis. One spirals into, "Why me?" despair. The other asks, "What part of this can I control?" The difference isn't denial, but clarity. Epictetus, who knew true physical suffering, put it bluntly, "You're not hurt by what happens, but by your opinion about it." This isn't about suppressing fear, it's about channeling it into actionable focus. So here's the question hidden in their wisdom. What would change if you stopped treating your body as a perfectible machine and started seeing it as a temporary vessel that occasionally springs leaks? The executive who secretly fears retirement because her identity is tied to vitality might discover new dimensions of herself through planned convalescence days. The athlete obsessively tracking biomarkers might find liberation in occasionally skipping metrics to simply feel alive. Even small acts like spending a day in silence to simulate hearing loss can reveal how much joy exists beyond physical perfection. The Stoics weren't masochists, they were realists. They knew that bodies age, cells mutate, accidents happen. By making peace with this truth early, they freed up energy for what truly matters, cultivating virtues that no illness can touch. Your hands may shake, but your courage can remain steady. Your memory might fade, but your kindness lingers in those you've touched. That's the ultimate Stoic resilience, building a self that isn't dependent on the body's cooperation. As Marcus Aurelius scribbled during a feverish night, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. However frail the vessel, the contents stay vibrant. Epictetus took this further with his famous amphora exercise. Students were told to imagine their prized possessions as fragile clay jars, beautiful but destined to shatter. The lesson: care for them deeply, but practice releasing them calmly when the time comes. Our bodies are those jars. The Stoic secret isn't ignoring their cracks, but learning to appreciate the light that shines through them. After all, even a broken amphora can hold flowers just differently than before. We've traveled deep into Stoicism's heart, where three timeless principles collide to forge unshakable mindsets. First, Memento Mori, not as morbid fixation, but as a wake-up call to live with urgency. Remember Marcus Aurelius starting each day acknowledging impermanence, or Seneca treating every conversation as potentially his last. This isn't about fear, it's about presence. Then the dichotomy of control, Epictetus teaching us to focus only on what's ours to command, our choices, our efforts, our responses. Like a sailor adjusting sails instead of cursing the wind. And finally, amor fati, the love of fate, not passive resignation, but active collaboration with life's unfolding, whether it brings triumph or trials. These aren't abstract ideas, they're tools that turn the fear of endings into fuel for beginnings. When you stop running from mortality, something extraordinary happens. Petty grudges feel lighter, courage comes easier, even joy sharpens because you're no longer taking it for granted. The Stoics didn't just tolerate this truth, they weaponized it. Death became their compass, pointing them toward what truly mattered: integrity over image, depth over distraction, and moments fully lived over years half felt. Now here's your invitation. Tonight, take out a journal and answer this. If this were my last week, what one habit, conversation, or act of courage would I prioritize? Not a grand bucket list item, but something immediate: calling the friend you've been meaning to reconnect with, starting that project you've sidelined, or simply sitting quietly with a loved one without glancing at your phone. The goal isn't to cram more into your days, it's to wring more meaning from ordinary moments. Seneca, who saw Rome's elite chase empty accolades, left us this parting wisdom: life is long enough if you know how to use it. That's the art these ancient thinkers mastered, not adding years to life, but life to years. The hourglass is tipping for all of us. The question is, how will you spend the sand still flowing? Your unshakable mindset starts not with more time, but with better attention to the time you already hold. The rest